Rabbi, we've had a recurring, well, we've gone through a lot of the different philosophical traditions, and we regularly visit this idea of the traditionally was called the great chain of being, from matter to life to consciousness to conscious awareness of consciousness. And we've talked to people who believe that that ladder stacks from the bottom in a materialist fashion, and they tend to suggest that consciousness comes out of what they would call an epiphenomenon. Uh, and then there's those that we might call more idealists, who, and I guess the more traditional religious metaphysic is that things came down from on high. And, we've referred to Finnegan, who fell off his ladder and woke up, and, all of these things. But there's definitely has been through history these two different camps: consciousness that got built up out of matter, or consciousness that was the whole game, that usually they'll use the word emanation, that trickled down into matter, and that our consciousness is part of that. And then there is, I think, variations that want to put the two together, and the have your cake and eat it too people. And so I'm wondering, what do you think about that in general? Do you think consciousness is an epiphenomenon, or are we drops of superconsciousness that's slowed down itself into matter? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I knew that by being on this podcast, I would learn something, Brian. That was the reason why I wanted to
Oh,
participate. So I think your explanation of this dichotomy probably is as clear a description as I've been given by anybody. So thank you for that. Um,
oh, well, thank
what
you.
what I can say is that this may seem like a tangent, but I don't think it's a tangent. There was a great Jewish scholar whose name was Gershom Scholem, and he kind of resuscitated the idea of Jewish mysticism. Um, in the 1800s, mysticism. So in the 1800s, scholars of Judaism wanted to approach Judaism in a very scientific way. And so the idea that there was a mystical element in Judaism was somewhat suppressed. It was viewed as this is just a minority view and never really had much importance. And Judaism is very rational. Sholem in the 20th century started to study that and to actually refute that approach, and showed that mysticism actually was a more important part of Judaism than people had been led to believe by these rational scholars from the 1800s. Um, Sholem approached Jewish mysticism as an academic, and he uncovered documents and manuscripts, and he systematized the volume of literature that was out there and organized it and synthesized it, and actually brought great coherence to the topic of Jewish mysticism. However, he was criticized by mystics as not being a mystic, right? He was an academic who studied mysticism. He was not a mystic. Um, I probably learned much of what I know about Jewish mysticism by reading Gershom Scholem and then his students subsequently. And I would put myself in the same camp that as a physicist, I think I'm pretty far afield from being a mystic, but I appreciate what mysticism has to offer, and I'm interested in it in maybe more a scholarly way than in a seeker's approach. Having said all that, when I speak on this topic, I'm speaking more from the perspective of somebody who's trying to understand what it's about, not somebody who's actually seeking the divine through mystical practices. And so this is going to come across very naively, but it's going to come back to what you said. My understanding of what a mystic in general tries to do, and certainly this applies to Jewish mystics as well, is that we struggle with two different, very diverse perspectives on God. One is God as beyond all comprehension. And this is kind of the, super whatever it was that you were saying, right? Something way beyond anything we could possibly comprehend. Um, that's one image, if you will, of God. But when we go through hardship in life and we struggle with personal issues, what we want is a God that's very close to us, that's very, it touches our soul in a very deep way. And so Jewish mysticism, which is pretty formalized, if you will, is a structure to connect that one image of God beyond our comprehension with the other desire of a God that's intimate and close and caring and some entity that we can approach as on a personal basis. And what Jewish mysticism, what Kabbalah does is bridge that gap with, in fact, one of the words that you mentioned, which is what triggered this train of thought for me, emanations, that there are multiple emanations of God, and there's sort of a hierarchy, if you will, and these emanations are the process by which this beyond comprehension God connects to this intimate personal God. Now, having said everything I just said, Brian, I have no idea if that even begins to explore what you were asking.